I'm delivering my keynote in Brisbane on the lands of the Yugara and Turrbal peoples, who have been its continuous living custodians for upwards of 40,000 years, and who have maintained music throughout this custodianship as a means of sharing vital cultural knowledge. I acknowledge the strength and the leadership of the Yugara and Turrbal people and their elders, past, present, and emerging. I acknowledge the urgent need for Australia to address structural racism which is embedded in our culture and systems of government, and which continue to disproportionately impact Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Black Lives Matter. I'm honoured to be invited to speak with you at the Australasian Computer Music Conference hosted by the Australian National University, and I want to extend my thanks to the conference organisers and to you for watching. I'm Klein. I'm convener of popular music and technology at the University of Queensland. I'm a sound engineer, a producer, an experimental composer performer. I've also been a professional operatic mezzo soprano, and I'm known for writing transgressive electronic opera. I'm currently leading a research cluster at the University of Queensland, exploring interactive composition with a focus on virtual and augmented reality art music experiences. Today I'm going to talk to you about issues relating to inclusive participation, particularly ways of reframing computer music to be inclusive of women's participation. Now, it's important to stress that I'm using this term inclusively to encompass all female identifying people, and I hope this conversation will also be useful to gender non-binary folks and other people who feel marginalised in computer music spaces. Growing up, I had little exposure to music, so I accidentally became a composer, performer, producer due to a chance encounter with music production. In 2000, I took an elective course in music technology, learning Cubase VST on an iMac G3, and suddenly I was producing sample-based electroacoustic experimentations and MIDI pop songs. The lecturer was one of a handful of women in Australia at that time teaching music production, and because of her presence at the front of the classroom, I just didn't know that production careers were rare for women. So I set up a studio and started making music and teaching production at Macquarie University. And while I was there, I set up Australia's first university course in DJing. Women saw me at the front of the classroom and they knew too that they could produce. I later became Australia's first female Ableton Live certified trainer. 20 years on, women still face challenges entering production, and from time to time I encounter students and colleagues who get narky by the presence of women in studios. But it's getting better, mostly because technology is becoming more accessible and it offers women an alternate pathway into music practice. Technology gave me the means of finding my voice as a composer and shaping ideas privately in the studio before sharing them publicly. As Paula Wolf once described, the studio is, for me, a room of my own, providing an alternate infrastructure for composition that is normally embedded in the institutions of Western classical music. I've gone on to work my entire adult life in the music industry, really thanks to a chance encounter with a basic DAW and MIDI keyboard. Today I make large-scale festival works which blend performance with installation experiences, and I also compose post-genre works for art music ensembles. My instruments are laptop and voice. Production was my entry point to composition and performance, but a fascination with emerging technologies has propelled me to explore new configurations of music in each project. And this is very much in the tradition of artists like Björk, Holly Herndon, and Imogen Heap. Like these women, I've been defining and exploring new sounds and experiences by testing and really pushing through the boundaries of what's possible. My most recent projects use biomedical technologies, virtual and augmented reality, and machine learning to explore the often gendered tensions which exist between the body, technology, data, and social justice. And this is helping me to continually redefine my compositional practice, while also inviting audiences into new kinds of relationships with music and with themselves. So the emphasis of my music is always the the conversation that I'm really trying to open up with my audience. And technology is the core to the execution of every work I make. But importantly, it's not normally what I foreground in the aesthetic experience of the work. I just don't want it to get in the way. So you get a sense of what I'm talking about. I want to take some time to talk about one of my recent projects called Vocal Womb. Vocal Womb is a biomedical opera and installation for mezzo-soprano, laptop, laryngoscope, stethoscopes, and a control surface, and it premiered at Monofoma in 2018. Vocal Womb explores how voice matters to our humanity by revealing its internal biomechanics and its social construction. An opera singer performs, and the physicality of her voice is exposed through real-time video projection, sonic amplification, and biometric data visualization in order to make conscious the physical action of phonation for the audience. A laryngoscope operated by the singer reveals the intricate motion of our vocal cords during their sounding. Stethoscopes attached to the performer's body make audible her heart, lungs, and intestines. And the singer's biometric data, my biometric data, is collated through these feeds, visualized and projected into the space. And by witnessing a singer's vocal production, the audience takes part in a very intimate and visceral experience of another person's body during its sounding. The audience is able to remix the singer's bodily feeds in real time using the mix controller, and this allows the audience to explore the relationality of vocal identity and power by stepping into and directly manipulating the voice of another person. And by relinquishing control of both her internal and external voice, the singer shows us how easily the voices of the vulnerable can be radically reshaped or silenced, and what this means for our humanity. I'm just going to play you a little bit now.
Having dinner, Zach in his high chair sat across from me. Reading stories, the little yellow digger, and time for bed. Contractions, Good night, sweetheart, sweet dreams, my darling. Good night, sweetheart, sweet dreams, my darling. Contractions.
Technically, vocal womb is extremely complex. To create vocal womb, I worked with my long-term textile audio collaborator, Ravi Glasavora, to devise a technical architecture for the live performance, which drew together the medical device feeds into a manipulatable, streamable experience using processing, Max, Live, and a custom control surface. Vocal womb is the first composition to deploy laryngoscopy during real-time vocal performance for a live audience. Previous works featuring laryngoscopy employed pre-recorded videos of vocal function only. So in realising this work, I spent about 2 years refining how to sing operatically with the mediation of a laryngoscope. And the composition techniques were shaped by the constraints and affordances of the laryngoscope and voice in this mediated relationship. So the music needed to be singable with the laryngoscope in place, while also showcasing a diverse range of sung and spoken vocal textures. Live processing, instrumentation, and field recording subtly augment the sounds of the singer's body and the libretto text. And these are further modified by the audience, who remix the live biosensory feeds from the singer's body, verifying her physical presence and experimenting with how her voice audibly sounds within the performance. Vocal womb was an overwhelming success from both a critical and an audience perspective. And it was called the #1 coolest thing at MoFo 2018 by Time Out Melbourne. This work and other works I make exist between popular and classical music, acoustic and technological music experience. And because of this sort of in-between location, I've encountered difficulties of reception which reflect and possibly accentuate some of the structural barriers to participation that many women, gender non-binary folks, and other minority participants can experience when they enter music practices such as art music or computer music. Now, without relaying a shopping list of problematic experiences that I've had personally, it's possible to summarise some of the cultural attitudes which can become problematic for inclusive participation in computer music into a few categories. Attitude 1, the maker, which says that if you make music in a DAW or with commercial software, it isn't really computer music. Or if your work doesn't foreground technology so people can clearly see the technological effort or innovation as its central feature, then you aren't as skilled a computer musician. All computer music equals custom, programmed, hacked, and fabricated. Attitude 2, the gearhead, which says if you aren't obsessed with gear or don't spend time building a public profile showing others that you're obsessed with gear, then you aren't a computer musician. Computer musicians nerd out about this stuff as part of their persona, and skill is reflected by the demonstration of particular kinds of knowledge. Attitude 3, the genre police, which says If your music doesn't fit within a particular aesthetic, it isn't computer music. Computer music equals algorithmic, noisy, electronic, electroacoustic, or percussive. The thing about inclusion is that it's often not overt, but rather the subtle gestures which tell you if you're in or you're out, if you belong or if you don't. So in highlighting these attitudes, I'm not suggesting that if you're a computer musician, you shouldn't nerd out about gear, custom make things, showcase technological innovation in your work, or fashion a genre-based aesthetic in your output. I'm also not saying that women don't do these things. I'm obsessed with certain kinds of gear. I hack things together in Macs and custom make instruments or components for my projects. These attitudes become problematic when they create a visible barrier for entry or a barrier for full participation in a music community, when others are made to feel excluded if they don't exhibit these same tendencies. So let's break down why these attitudes can be unproductive for fostering an inclusive computer music community in more detail. To participate in computer music, people typically have experience with either science, technology, engineering and maths, or music composition, performance and production. But these pathways to participation are fraught for women and discourage women from being full and equal participants. So let's look at that reality first so that we can better understand how the attitudes I've mentioned reinforce gender exclusion. Firstly, let's look at STEM. So as children, our culture socialises girls out of learning science, technology, engineering and maths, which, according to the Australian government, leads to, quote, low STEM participation rates and low STEM aspiration in school compared with boys. This is influenced by, quote, negative stereotypes about STEM and gender, a lack of female role models, lower self-confidence and strong feelings of anxiety towards maths and science, despite having the same ability and achievement as boys, and reliance on parents or local networks for career advice, which may be fragmented. This means that from an early age, girls are discouraged from developing the technology-related skills required to participate in computer music. The consequence is that only 25% of Australians with post-secondary qualifications in information technology are female, according to Professionals Australia. Only 28% of people working in IT are female, compared to 45% of the workforce across all professional industries. Research by Professionals Australia demonstrates Australian female IT workers experience occupational segregation, gender-based discrimination, which reinforces intersectional discrimination, unconscious bias in workplace culture, bias in career-building activities, and a gender pay gap. Cumulatively, this leads to significant attrition in the female workforce because women feel they can't advance their careers. These factors are consistent both for women who have families and for women who don't, and women who work on a part or full-time basis, according to Professionals Australia. Rachel Thomas states, quote, if you think women in tech is just a pipeline problem, you haven't been paying attention. Because of the high attrition rate for women working in tech, teaching more girls and women to code is not enough to solve this problem. And Thomas cites the Harvard Business Review, which found that 41% of women working in tech eventually end up leaving the field, compared to just 17% of men. Now, moving our attention to music. In Australia, while gender parity is present in high school music study, fewer females enter tertiary music study. Recent research shows that working Australian musicians overwhelmingly have post-secondary music education, with formal music study being a normal pathway for entering the profession of music. In Australia, 55% of musicians and 60% of composers are male, out of a population of 17,100 people who are defined as, quote, practicing professionals, a very specific definition. And if you look more broadly at the music industry, APRA AMCOS represents over 100,000 Australasian members who are songwriters, composers, and music publishers. And of that membership, only 21.7% of members identify as female, and female members earn an average of 90 cents for every dollar earned by male members. In the 2019 Australian music industry, women made up 43% of artist managers, 38% of senior leadership in indie record labels, and 38% of public board members on industry peak bodies. Of the top 100 songs played on Australian radio in 2019, 55% featured a solo male artist or all-male band only, 9% featured mixed-gendered artists, 24% featured a solo female artist or all-female group only, and the remaining 12% of songs featured a female artist as the lead singer only. The Making Music Work report summarised it thusly, quote, "Despite increased awareness of issues confronting women and other marginalised groups, aspects of music such as jazz, music technology and composition retain systemic inequalities, as does the formal music curriculum and the gender imbalance within leadership roles. These inequalities impact both aspiring and practicing musicians." End quote. It's worthy of noting that Australian female musicians report significantly higher levels of financial stress than male musicians, and that the pay gap for Australian female artists and musicians is significantly greater than the 16% pay gap across all Australian industries. Focusing now on music production, there generally isn't good available data on female participation in music production and music technology, and this is especially the case in Australia. In the UK, where music technology is available as a secondary education subject, 80% of Level 3 music technology students are male and 88% of music technology students in higher education are male. It is estimated that only 7% of members of the Audio Engineering Society are not male. If we look to international figures, a multi-year study of the Billboard Hot 100 charts showed that only 2.1% of producers were female, which equates to a gender ratio of, wait for it, 36.7 males to every one female producer. 3% of engineers or mixers in popular music are women, according to this study. One of the biggest challenges facing computer music is that it's an interdisciplinary area of practice where all of these pathways to involvement contain structural barriers for diverse participation. Now, if we're at this conference, we're likely privileged participants in this community. So it's up to us not only to be vigilant, but also to actively work to dismantle structural inequalities. Let's return to some of those attitudes. Attitude 1, the maker, which equates primary value in computer music to the custom made, where making bespoke tools displaces the value of making bespoke music. So how does this become a problematic trope? We've talked about the barriers which prevent girls and women developing and sustaining engagement with STEM, music composition and music production, which are the most direct pathways to participating in computer music. For many women, like myself and Bridget Chappell, our other keynote, music technology and production is the entry point to an inquisitive music making practice. And that's most likely going to involve developing music production skills, utilising mainstream recording and production platforms. And if these are visible and supported within computer music communities and not presented as a lesser kind of practice, it will be much easier for girls to participate. Simple or accessible tools should not be frowned upon. I believe that computer and electroacoustic music is about experimentation, generating sonic wonder, opening up new musical textures, challenging established aesthetics and practices, questioning the world, working in immersive ways, working in political ways, and revealing insights about data as a way of understanding our world. Simple tools like DAWs and other platforms can be applied to work in this way. And if anyone is unclear about that, I suggest they go and watch Bridget Chappell's amazing keynote from the first night of the conference, where she unpacks sonification techniques, her work Undertow, and the inclusive education approach taken at Sound School. It's available on the Australasian Computer Music Conference YouTube page. The maker attitude can also play out in other problematic ways. particularly when people assume that if a work doesn't foreground the technology used to make it in its experience, then it isn't computer music. Now, my work tends to provoke this attitude from colleagues when I share it in computer music circles, and vocal womb is one example of that. Some colleagues, without having experienced vocal womb, were dismissive of it because they couldn't see the technical effort of its making in the online videos. And in doing so, they kind of missed the point of the work, which was to explore the relationship between voice, gender, and power. Personally, I want to develop works of art which promote conversations about social justice and works which foster community. And I don't feel like I have the energy to do that and also enter a flame war with someone over whether the coding of my Max patch was visible in the experience as a way of verifying my programming virtuosity. For computer music to be inclusive, its communities need to recognise that some participants make work which utilises the techniques of computer music without necessarily displaying them in the experience. And for reasons discussed next, foregrounding technology in the experience of a work might not always lead to desirable outcomes for female identifying creators. So we need to make space for work which represents differently. Attitude 2, the gearhead, which prioritises tech knowledge and skill demonstrations as the ultimate cultural capital. So how can this become a problematic attitude? When I was growing up, my parents brought a Commodore 128 for my brother. I was not allowed to use it or any other computer in our household for the next decade. Sparrow writes that the personal computer revolution of the 1980s and 1990s solidified the gendering of technology in our homes, noting that, quote, parents bought computers for their sons, but not for their daughters, even when the girls had expressed an interest in computing. As a result, boys arrived at university with a degree of computer knowledge that their female counterparts lacked. For decades thereafter, high technology became an overwhelmingly male field, end quote. Now, the consequence of this was a complete shift in women's participation in computer science, as you can see on this slide, which references women's tertiary education specializations in America from 1970 to 2014. The problem of gearhead culture is that it's not a level playing field. Our culture socializes STEM as a masculine domain and socializes girls away from engagement. A focus on gear can put women and girls off participating entirely because they often have less accumulated knowledge capital to draw on from their male counterparts as a consequence of childhood education deficits. So when knowledge of gear denotes status, the value of those with lesser knowledge or confidence is called into question. When women choose to enter gear and geek culture, they're often held to impossibly high standards or face outright abuse, as Gamergate has shown us. Now, for an excellent summary of this in the games industry, I recommend that you read a chapter by De Winter and Kokorek, and I'll leave the details here. As the Australian government notes, girls exhibit the same achievement levels in STEM, but they are lacking in confidence because we don't support them to develop it. To make computer music communities inclusive, we need to be aware that conversations about gear and tech can very quickly descend into bombastic demonstrations of knowledge. We need to intervene when this happens and make safe spaces for beginners to learn their craft, talk about the techniques of making as open-ended processes, and not frame knowledge in competitive ways. Attitude 3, the genre police. The attitude which says that music must fit within certain aesthetic parameters to be called computer music. This attitude can become problematic when very precise aesthetic distinctions are used to exclude certain types of people from full participation in the computer music community. So, what do I mean? If you attend computer music conferences and festivals like this most excellent gathering, you can often see strong aesthetic tendencies which perceptibly define computer music as a compositional genre. You might also listen to papers analysing compositional techniques which are genre typical. Now, I'm not going to spend time defining what those aesthetic techniques may be beyond the references I've made earlier. But if we look to the musical training that girls have access to, so singing, playing certain kinds of instruments, now particularly smaller, higher pitched instruments like flute and violin, but notably not percussion or brass, you'll notice that these textures aren't well represented in the kinds of music which gets programmed at computer music events. Studies show that boys are socialised towards, quote, instruments that are struck or require high levels of physical exertion, end quote, and dominate participation in electric guitar, bass guitar, drum set, and brass. So put simply, girls are socialised towards melodic musical training and away from instruments which develop skills with beats, bass, sonic manipulation, and sound processing. So a good question for this community is whether such aesthetic tendencies can shift and become more inclusive of the textures and timbres which feature in the kinds of instrumental music education women and girls can more easily access. Now, to do this, we must consider the diversity of who is programming computer music events, the diversity of who is being programmed, and the kinds of sonic diversity being represented. As I mentioned earlier, I believe the core of computer and electroacoustic music is about finding approaches which open up new possibilities of sonic knowledge and experience. This can be achieved without adherence to particular timbres or aesthetics. Research shows that in education settings, when females are seen playing masculine gendered instruments, more girls opt to play them. So for computer music, we need to make our female artists visible and numerous in programming selection, and this can go hand in hand with broadening computer music's aesthetic markers to be more inclusive. I now want to jump to talking about the music technology program I run at the University of Queensland as an example of how a carefully designed curriculum can sort of circumvent the attitudes we've discussed today and invite women into new relationships with music and technology. As an educator, I use technology to help students forge new relationships with their music practice. And I do this by incorporating production experiences into really large-scale creative projects. My current institution runs an elite Western classical performance program, and our students aspire to be instrumental soloists performing traditional repertoire, or alternatively music educators in schools, often with a focus on instrumental or choral music instruction. When I started at UQ in 2015, music technology was a very traditional program, and it was focused on sound engineering. Weekly workshops at the advanced level consisted of students gathering around a mixing console, much like this one, and an industry-based sound engineer would mix something in real time while the students watched. The focus was on developing elite technical skills with hardware, and the students were required to self-instruct on the console outside of hours. It also really assumed a familiarity with guitar and rock-based production aesthetics, and assessments rewarded students really for fostering this gearhead attitude that we've talked about. Not surprisingly, this pedagogical approach resulted in the cohort being skewed male by a 2-to-1 ratio. I needed to redevelop the curriculum in line with our student profile, and a significant focus of that work was to make the program really more inclusive and creatively focused. To inform this process, I worked with a small research team to conduct a review of 63 Australian music technology courses. And what we found was that overwhelmingly, Australian music technology curriculum design emphasises creative technical learning, primarily music production skills, and related competencies, so things like novel and adaptive thinking, computational thinking, new media literacy, and design mindsets. However, the majority of courses also exhibited significant skill gaps in things like cross-cultural competency, transdisciplinarity, and collaboration. And you can see the results of this study at the following publication I'll put on screen. While gender was not the primary focus of this analysis, UQ Music's 2015 technology curriculum exhibited these same tendencies, and the curriculum was demonstrably not attracting female students at the same rate as it was attracting male students. So we rewrote the program, and we used two models to do this. The first was the 10 skills for the future workforce, and the other was the iterative cyclic model of music creation interrelationships, with this latter model being a model of music curriculum I developed for program revisions at the University of New England. Now, for reasons of time, I won't go into these methodologies, but you can read more about them in the article that we've published. I run classes where students are designing digital instruments, making interactive installations, designing game audio, or performing in technology ensembles. And we use this focus as a means of pushing through the preconceptions of their musical identities, which allows them to experiment with composition, arrangement, and improvisation. Last semester, I taught students how to create and program music and sound design for games in Unity. These students then applied those skills by working for 12 weeks to design and make interactive audiovisual installations with students from architecture and interaction design. And this was for a real-world festival, the UQ Bloom Festival. So our students were not just composing, but they were coding, they were fabricating, they were installing and handling all of the other logistical things required to realize a real-world festival artwork. And this was experienced and disrupted by the general public. So tens of thousands of visitors attended campus and experienced their works. And the entire process was student-led, so staff provided support and advice, but the students were really in charge. And some of them then went on to complete a specialist summer course in digital musical instrument design. Many of the approaches that I've described overlap with the techniques of computer music. By structuring production-based learning experiences around creative activities which students self-organise with staff support, I've watched the gender ratios in my music technology program at UQ shift from a 2-to-1 male to female ratio to gender parity within 3 years, while also increasing international student participation. I believe if framed correctly, technology gives all students a way of crafting music away from their instruments, which is incredibly liberating because production offers different avenues into music creation without the rules associated with conventional Western composition or instrumental study. If notation isn't expressive of your musical language, perhaps singing or sampling or sequencing is. And if you don't yet have a musical language, perhaps you can self-construct one. So how did we do it? How did we reach gender parity? We focused on teaching creative skills, musical skills, real-world scenario responses or problem solving in every class. And the focus was really on artistic output, not technical output. So the gearhead attitude is very much not present. We allowed students to bring their other musical and non-musical skills into the classroom and in particular their assessment activities. So they start from a position of strength, knowing that their existing skills are valued. This avoids competitive demonstrations of value or inclusion which can be associated with some of the problematic attitudes we've discussed today. We flipped the classroom and we made all technical demonstrations as videos which can be watched or re-watched ahead of class time. So for students who don't feel so confident, this gives them a chance to work at their own pace and really feel on top of their learning, and this is critical. It's a great way of managing and leveling the gearhead attitude as well. We developed a bi-weekly structure, running a workshop on a particular skill set in the first week and then asking students to complete a time-based creative project the following week to demonstrate their learning. This provides a supportive structure for students to showcase technical learning through creative output, but we also took care for the focus to not be primarily on technology or specific techniques that may feature in, say, the maker or genre police attitudes. We take care to explain technical concepts without jargonistic language, but also to support students to grow technical language over time because this helps them gain confidence. We reinforce technical concepts with real-world music, art or media examples showcasing a really diverse range of artists and approaches to practice. This allows students to see someone who resembles them achieving and making music. Importantly, we allow students to self-organise. Students work collaboratively with people they trust. For female students, being isolated in a group with male students can sometimes reinforce technology stereotypes by forcing them to encounter all of the attitudes that we've discussed today. For some students, that isn't a problem, but here choice is vital to growing confidence and to feeling included. Also importantly, we have women leading our programs. Not exclusively, but I am the face of the Popular Music and Technology major, and we take care to have a careful balance of women on our teaching teams. Being visible is a clear statement to our students that it's okay, in fact normal, for women to be music technologists. This is what the students have said. Quote, "I thought the whole music technology thing would be like coding and computers and it would be very overcomplicated. But the way the concepts are explained during class and the way it's presented to us in the videos, by simplifying ideas to make us understand it better, just makes it so much easier. I've been able to understand everything in this course because of that," end quote. I'll leave you to read some of the other student comments on screen. So, what's next for me? In September, I start building the What If Lab XR space for the University of Queensland. The XR space is a transdisciplinary research laboratory for creating film, literature, art, games, software and performance works using extended reality technologies. Its focus is to solve problems in the community and envisage a better society through the creation of artwork. Yesterday, I launched my next large-scale creative work called Another Future. I'm the 2020 recipient of the Ensemble Offspring Noisy Women Commission, and together we have launched Another Future as a collaborative project inviting audience members to contribute stories, images, and objects. But rather than talk about it, I'll show you the project video. Unchecked, climate change will lead to the mass displacement of vulnerable people. I'm Eve Klein, a composer working with Ensemble Offspring and writer Elaine Kelly. Together we're making a work which places everyday people and their homes at the centre of a compassionate response to climate change. But to do this, we need your help. Have you lost a home or left a home behind? And did you keep something to remember it by? Maybe house keys, a garden statue, a license plate, a toy, or anything else? We're looking to tell the story of our homes through these objects. Do you have something you can share with us? We're looking for digital stories and photographs which you can submit online through my website eveklein.com. And if you want to, you can even send us the object itself. I'll weave your stories into a music and visual performance which will be presented at zeitgeist.com. And donated objects will be curated into a real-world and online exhibition and also played as percussion instruments in an upcoming Ensemble Offspring performance. So to find out more or to contribute, visit eveklein.com. It's been an honour to speak with you today, and I'd love to open up the floor to any questions that you might have.